Welcome to this episode of Battlefield America. We have today Steve Wolfson, is the District Attorney of Clark County. Welcome on.
Thanks for having me on your show, Rob. It's a pleasure.
Why don't you start by telling people what you do? What is the job of District Attorney?
Well, in general, I'm the Chief Prosecutor for Clark County. I have 4 divisions. I have my Criminal Division, my Civil Division, my Juvenile Division, and my Family Support Division. A lot of people don't realize that the DA's office is very diverse, but the heart and soul of my office is the Criminal Division. I have 750 employees, 175 attorneys, the largest law firm in the state of Nevada.
Wow. So this is something that people don't understand, and they see the news every day, and they see the horrible things reported. And so I want to ask you as a person, every morning you get up from your bed, you put on your suit, you go to work, and you fight monsters. You fight people that buried them, like the MS-13 gangs bury people in the desert after cutting them up. You fight people who kill children, who traffic children. The most horrible things in our society you deal with every day. Are there times at night you're just laying in bed and thinking about these cases and the things that you see, and how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you're right, Rob. I do see all of what you've described, but I've been a lawyer 37 years, and I've been working in the criminal justice system that entire time. So I've seen most of it already, but when you think you've seen it all, something else comes along and you say, oh my God. I deal with children that get shot. I deal with women that get beat up. I deal with a lot of the worst crimes. And yes, there are cases that make me wake up at night and think twice and 3 times and 4 times. It wears on you. But what I've learned is to take deep breaths and to talk to my staff and to talk to people in this community. You know, sometimes decisions are controversial and sometimes decisions are close calls. You're not sure which way to go. And a lot of times I'll run a fact pattern by the folks I have coffee with in the morning, non-lawyers. And then certainly I'll staff it with the lawyers in my office so that I get the best informed people and the best information to enable me to make the best decision.
But you're going to the morgue sometimes to see these bodies of victims in your effort to prosecute them, gain evidence, collect evidence. I mean, over 6 years of doing this and seeing these things day to day, it must wear on you a little bit.
Well, it does. And I'll give you an example of something, like I said just a minute ago, about when you think you've seen it all. 2 days after 1 October, I stood on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay in Mr. Paddock's room, where he shot and killed 58 people and injured hundreds more. And I actually went up to the windows where he shot from and stood in the room where his own blood was on the floor after killing himself. And it hit me. It really did. It was one of those oh my God moments, because I was there where this killer executed and hurt so many people. And it made an everlasting impression on me. But like I said,
did you tour the area, the Round 91 area?
The festival area? Yeah. No, I didn't go actually down to it because there were crime scene folks down there, and I was not allowed to go the day I visited it. But I was in the room where he shot, and I could look down and see that horrible festival site.
Well, you know, that brings up an issue that we brought up with your opponent, the death penalty. And we asked your opponent his position on the death penalty, and he told us only in extreme cases. And I asked him about whether he would have prosecuted and sought the death penalty for Stephen Paddock had he survived. Would you have?
Without a doubt. That's a no-brainer to me. Anybody that purposely kills 58 people, intending to kill hundreds more. The only reason it's 58 and not many more is because some of those folks that were shot survived. And I can't think of a situation or a person more deserving for a jury to consider giving the death penalty than Stephen Paddock. And I'll tell you a little story. On the morning of 1 October, I went to Metro within about 8 hours after the shooting, and the sheriff came up to me, and the first words he said to me was, Steve, the bad guy shot and killed himself, so there'll be no prosecution. It's the first thing that Joe Lombardo said to me, and I've never forgotten it, because in my opinion, Paddock got off too easy. He got off too easy by killing himself. I would have liked him to have been captured so that we could have processed him through the criminal justice system and achieved the death penalty and executed him. And you know, I'm not this hardcore death penalty in every case. And as you know, Rob, I've reduced the number of death penalty filings in the Clark County DA's office since taking office by 50%, because I believe that only certain categories of folks should qualify for the death penalty. But there's no doubt in my mind that Mr. Paddock is one of those.
That brings up another issue, and that's the explosion, frankly, in homicides over the last several years in the Valley. What do you count for those, and what can your office do to reduce those?
Well, that's a tough issue because we do have a rise in homicides. In fact, in 2017, we broke a record for the number of homicides in Clark County, and we did so without counting the 1 October 58
How many homicides
number.
do we have in 2017?
165, I think, which is far more than the average.
Wow.
And that's,
Wow.
like I said, not counting the 58 poor
Right.
souls that lost their lives in 1 October, because statistically that was an aberration, and the people that keep statistics don't think it should count. But to answer your question, it's a multifaceted situation. There's not just one reason why we have more homicides. One theory is that California relaxed some of their laws regarding parole, and more of their dangerous offenders are being released, and many of them are coming to Clark County. I think it's just a sign that we have more gang members, because a certain percentage of our homicides are gang related. A lot of them are armed robberies. A lot of them are domestic violence situations. But I'm hoping that as the years go forward, with the more cops that are on the street, with the more community policing, with the more treatment that we give to people, because some of these homicides are as a result of addictive behavior, whether it's drugs or alcohol or prescription drugs or mental illness. These people have issues, and if we can treat them before they get to that last end shooting, I think we'll reduce our homicide rate.
Well, you have a very unique job being the DA of Clark County, because you not only have, 2.2 million people here in the county, but you have 47 million tourists every year.
Yeah.
And
I did the math one time. It's about 102,000 tourists a day.
And you have to prosecute them when they break the law. And so how do you go about doing that as far as dealing with them? Do they contribute to the crime statistics? Are we bringing in more people that are, and we just had a couple of people shot and killed in their hotel room.
Yeah, the Vietnamese couple, I think.
So,
in fact, we're very close, I believe, to making an arrest in that case.
Wow, I hope you break it with us.
Yeah.
So we were talking about reform though also, so let's talk about criminal justice reform. You were talking about reducing the number of death penalty cases you're seeking. How do you define criminal justice reform, and what does that mean as far as less arrests, less prosecutions, or do we focus our energy and our resources on the most important cases and not spend our energy in putting people in jail for minor stupid offenses?
Yeah. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head when you talk about the focus, and I think that's what we need to do more of, is focus on the priorities. Obviously, violent crime is a priority, and if people commit violent crimes, we're going to prosecute them, and we're going to prosecute them aggressively. But that's probably only 10% of the people we deal with. The other 90% are nonviolent offenders, property crimes, drug offenses, things like that. And we need to find ways to divert them out of the system, which we're doing. We have done a lot of reforms. I'm very pleased with some of the reforms we've done in the juvenile system. We have a brand new program down in the juvenile system called the Harbor. It's actually not brand new. It's been up and running for about 18 months. Before the Harbor was created, juveniles that committed crimes would be taken to juvenile hall, they'd be booked, and they'd sit a day or so in the facility. If they were nonviolent, they'd get released, but they were entered into the system. Now we have an alternative, and it's called the Harbor, where basically, rather than take them to jail, we take them to an assessment center to assess, what is the problem here? Is it depression? Is it mental health? Is it drugs? Is it alcohol? Is it violence? We bring in the parents so that we can incorporate the families. And in the 18 months the Harbor has been up and running, they've seen 3,000 juveniles.
Wow.
And only 4% of the 3,000 that have entered the harbor, the diversionary program, have had to go into the juvenile system. They didn't comply with the program.
Is this kind of program necessary, important part of preventing school shootings, where you can identify these kids that have a problem and get them the help they need?
Yeah, I think absolutely, because you look at the children that have committed these horrific offenses, the school shootings, and there's usually depression, mental illness, drugs, alcohol, a combination. And so I think if we can identify early the problems and get treatment and get attention. Right. Are the parents really involved in their children's lives?
Isn't that really the problem most of the time, the parents?
It is a lot of the times, yes. And I don't want to put the blame on the parents, because a lot of times we've got a single parent who's working 2 jobs. But if we can bring the parents into the discussion and tell the parents and the child, we want to help this child. We don't want to put him into jail and put him out at Caliente or Spring Mountain Youth Camp. We want to get him treatment. We're going to accomplish a lot, and that's what we're doing. And that's just one of the reforms we're doing.
What are the other reforms specifically that are going to be focused on? I think you mentioned not arresting people for specifically marijuana charges. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, our community has changed in the last few years. We've allowed medical marijuana and more recently recreational marijuana. So the citizens of Clark County have spoken loud and clear. So I think I need to reflect on that, which I've done. And when I say reflect, I think I need to adjust our priorities. So we don't put much priority on marijuana cases at all, because nobody wants us to.
Right.
Now, the exception is, if you're bringing a truckload of marijuana into this community, you're a peddler, you're a pusher, you're a trafficker, and that's against the law. So we will prosecute the high-level marijuana distributors. Because we have dispensaries. We have legal ways for people to purchase and enjoy the product. But the street marijuana folks, the young folks that have marijuana, we're not giving that a lot of priority at all.
We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to this episode of Battlefield America. I'm here with Steve Wolfson, who's the DA of Clark County. One of the issues that we were talking about was specialty courts. Can you tell us about specialty courts and what your opponent has been accusing you of not working with them and actually obstructing them?
Well, listen, my opponent is uninformed and telling lies about the specialty courts and my involvement, and here's why. When I took office in 2012, I had to interview with the county commissioners because it was an appointment process because my predecessor resigned. And I pledged at that time to put the DAs back into specialty courts because my predecessor had taken them out. he had to assign them to other divisions. I thought that that was wrong, so I pledged to put DAs back in specialty courts, and I did that 6 years ago. Since then, my DAs are in specialty courts every single day, multiple courts, and I've worked to advance those specialty courts, like Veterans Court. My DAs are in Veterans Courts.
How does Veterans Court work? Not specifically how the nuts and bolts, but is it working in helping protect veterans with PTSD from suicides? What are the results at the end of the day?
Well, the results are overwhelmingly good. We're treating people, because veterans, as you know, Rob, you're a veteran, have unique issues. PTSD and other issues after serving overseas and seeing some horrible things sometimes. They come back home, sometimes they have trouble getting jobs, family issues, etc. So they have unique issues. So our veterans courts, we have them at all levels. Up until a couple of years ago, Nevada law said that we should only have specialty veterans courts at the district court level. And I went to the legislature last year and caused our legislature to expand the jurisdiction of veterans courts. So now we have them in municipal and justice courts. And Judge Stevens in Henderson, Judge Saragosa, and Judge Letitia now at the Las Vegas Justice Court level are doing wonderful things. And they were before, but they didn't have the statutory authority, and there was a question about that. Now the legislature gave them the full authority to have veterans courts. I support veterans courts. I have endorsements from veterans groups, so it's working well. And our other specialty courts, to try and divert folks, the drug courts, the DUI courts. There's a new specialty court down in juvenile, and it's by Judge Sonny Bailey. It's for children with autism.
Wow.
Think about it.
Wow.
It's the first specialty court in the country that focuses on treating kids with autism, because they have special needs and special problems. So my office is very involved in specialty courts. In fact, we're always asking for new lawyers to put into specialty courts.
So we had your opponent on last week. We did a story this week about your opponent receiving over reportedly $500,000 from George Soros, being dumped into this county, into his race to help him defeat you. Why would they be doing that? Why are they helping him? What's going on there?
Well, listen, I'm very proud of the support I have. I started campaigning this cycle last September. I have thousands of supporters. I've raised a lot of money from Nevadans, because Nevadans, I believe in me. My opponent raised a mere $33,000 the first reporting period, which doesn't fund much of a campaign. But all of a sudden, this out-of-state billionaire came in with $500,000. And I would bet that this out-of-state billionaire never even met my opponent, because he's done this in races in California and elsewhere, and he's not very successful with his candidates. You know, there is a movement, a reform movement, and I'm for reforms. I've been doing reforms, but I don't think my opponent has much local backing at all. Because
well, he's accused you of corruption on our show. He's accused you of all kinds of things. Can you maybe respond to some of his accusations?
Well, you know, I'm the incumbent, and I have a lot of support, so I have a target on my back. So I believe that he has to throw mud to see what sticks. He doesn't have much else to go with, so he's telling a lot of lies. He says, I'm not in favor of specialty courts. That's totally false. He says my office isn't transparent. When I took over as the district attorney, no written decisions regarding officer-involved shootings were released. I changed that policy the first 60 days. We release written decisions on all officer-involved shootings. I give television interviews, sometimes too often. I get tired of seeing myself on TV. But I think it's appropriate for me to talk to the local media to answer questions about the decisions I make. So my opponent is telling a lot of lies because he's desperate, and that's what he thinks the people of Nevada want to hear. But I have a lot more confidence in the citizens of Clark County to see through the lies and hopefully put their trust and faith in me and reelect me.
So there is an issue that obviously we don't agree on, and that's the background checks that you advocated for. You were out there on TV advocating them for a whole year. And during that year, we reported that over 3,000 guns were stolen out of people's homes. So background checks may close the so-called loophole and not allow people to buy the guns from gun shows. for individuals, but they're going to get them through stealing them out of people's homes. They're going to get them. So what does it end up accomplishing by just basically taking away the rights of me to sell my gun to you as a law-abiding citizen?
Well, it doesn't take the right away from you to sell me a gun. It just asks you to have a background check done on me. And I'll use this example. If you and I were neighbors and we had had discussions about guns over the years, and then one day I said, you know, Rob, I really need to get a hold of a handgun. Do you have any extra handguns? You said, sure, Steve, I've got one and I'm willing to sell it to you. And you do, and you sell it to me. Unbeknownst that I just got into a really, really bad fight with my wife. I was arrested for domestic battery. I beat her up pretty bad, and I was a convicted abuser, and I was real mad and angry. I had depression and alcohol issues, and I wanted to kill my wife, okay? If you were required to go to a gun store and have a background check for about 25 bucks, you would have learned that I was just convicted of a domestic battery. Maybe you'd hesitate in selling me the gun that day. And if that was the case, I wouldn't get the gun that day, and maybe I would have started counseling, or I would have had second thoughts and not killed my wife. The supporters of the background check law are not saying that we're going to end all gun violence. What we're saying is there are certain categories of people, certain persons that suffer from mental illnesses, certain persons that have domestic battery convictions, that need to have background checks done, because some of those people will be denied access to guns if a background check were required. It'll save some lives.
Well, we've heard a lot about checking for mental illness and mental issues, but are you concerned that some people will refrain from seeking mental help because they're afraid of losing their rights? And there is no legal standard that's been set forth by the courts at this point to determine what is and is not a mental health threat and should be denied their rights.
No, you're right. You know, it's not a perfect answer to anything. I don't know any perfect answers to a lot of things, but it will assist in keeping guns out of certain people's hands. But you've raised a good point. I mean, just because somebody has a mental health issue doesn't mean absolutely they shouldn't be entitled to have a weapon, because they're entitled to defend themselves in their own home. I own guns. I have 3 guns at my home. And if a bad guy comes through the door, you know, I'm going to be prepared. So I'm not saying we take all guns away from everybody, but certain categories. And if you've been diagnosed or you've been treated for mental health, you know, part of the problem is our system of information sharing. Because we don't, in the justice system, share information between agencies effectively. For example, if a police officer comes along a mental health person and he's a danger to himself or others and takes him to a mental health facility, legally 2000s him is the term, that's entered into a computer database, but it's not accessible to a lot of other agencies for a background check, for example. So we need to fix some other things in our fight against having certain bad guys get guns.
What are your priorities if you get reelected next week?
Well, my first priority, and it remains my priority, is public safety, because that's what people care about most. They want to feel safe in their homes, when they go to the supermarket, when they're at schools with their children. So public safety, of course, is number one. Towards that end, I've increased the resources on my gun team. I have specialty prosecutor teams. I have a homicide team. I have a gang team. So I'm always focusing on resources to prosecute the violent offenders. I brought a 3rd grand jury to Clark County. We've had 2 grand juries for 40 years, but I wanted to target the most violent perpetrators. So I brought a 3rd grand jury, which came into existence January 1st of this year. It's been up and running for about 6 months. We've indicted about 50 people for very serious crimes.
I'm going to stop here because we have 2 minutes left.
Okay.
And I do want to give you the last 2 minutes to tell the audience why they should vote for you and give your website out.
Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you for having me on your show. You've asked me some very interesting and probing questions. I believe my experience and my balance and my fairness makes me the best candidate. My opponent has some experience, and he has some experience like me, being a defense lawyer and a prosecutor. But I was a city councilman for 8 years, managing a $500 million budget. Through the Great Recession, because I was a prosecutor from 04 to 12, during the recession. We had some hard times in the city and had to make some hard choices because of the money issues. Now I've been the DA for 6 years. I manage a $65 million budget. My opponent has some IRS issues, and he's got some issues with some financial issues, and I hope he overcomes them. But a lot of people are questioning his ability to manage such a large office with such a huge budget when he's got some of his own financial problems. But we're talking about me. I believe my experience, my fairness, my desire to keep bringing reforms to this county like I've been doing makes me the best choice.
Great. Thanks for having me. That was Steve Wolfson, District Attorney of Clark County. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Battlefield America.